everything you said, very clear in terms of why you'd want it as a buyer. Could you just add some color in terms of what sort of risks, I guess, putting it in our insurance language, if you've invested in a project, is it the trees didn't grow or they burned down, or what type of things are the main hazards that we'd be watching out for?
Yeah, of course. And let's split it slightly between the categories of carbon. So you have nature-based solutions, which are quite inherently carbon that is stored in nature and natural processes. And then you have your technological solutions. They have different risk categories. So we stick with nature first. So the key risk that we cover right now plays a bit into how the carbon markets work. At a high level, a carbon project, when it starts, goes through something called validation, which is based on its plan. It goes to something called a carbon standard, which is sort of one of the kind of quasi-regulators within the market. They give the carbon standard their plan for how they're going to plant these trees, and that gets validated, saying, based on your plan, we think you will have X tons of carbon over the next 30 years. Mm-hmm. Then they start running their project. At some point, they'll get verified. That's when someone will come around, measure their trees, and say, yes, the amount of carbon we thought you had, you do have. And then onwards from there, every year it gets verified. So right now, the key risk that we cover is, given the lack of supply in the market, people will invest in a project at that validation stage before, I'm going to stick with trees because it's simple, before the trees have actually grown up, before they have a verified carbon credit. So thus, I have given you money today, and I'm going to get a verified carbon credit in 5 years' time. And we're talking about trees. So the risks are, one category, your unavoidable loss, right? Your natural catastrophe, like your climate change itself, right? The fires, the storms, etc. That is quite an obvious risk that the reinsurance market understands, the insurance market understands. You then have the second risk, which we would term avoidable risks. So this is now the actual project developer who is planting and maintaining these trees. They might be fraudulent, they might be negligent, they might go insolvent, or they might just change their mind and abandon the project. Right? You can very much see the price of timber might spike up and the price of carbon might go down, and they think, I'm going to cut these trees down, I'll make a lot more money. So you have those kinds of avoidable losses. And then you have your carbon risks. And this is very specific to how the carbon markets work. So the methodology via how you quantify the carbon in the first place, that could change. Some new science could come to light that changes how much carbon I have or I expect. Or the carbon standard, that's actually the one assessing your credits, that could go insolvent, and thus you have nothing. So you have these kinds of three buckets of risk: your unavoidable, your avoidable, and your carbon risks. Plus, we were talking a bit about this amorphous Article 6 risk before the podcast started. You also have your political and regulatory risks, which again go into the global rules as to how carbon should be accounted for between countries and sellers and buyers. There's quite a lot of risks. That's before you've even received a verified carbon credit. That's what we would term delivery risk. Once you now have a verified carbon credit, I own this credit, I'm going to retire it against my net zero strategy. You still have fraud and negligence risk. What if it's invalidated? And you also have another key risk would be called your reversal risk. So the whole purpose of my investment is that that carbon is permanently stored away underground. However, there's quite an obvious risk that a fire might come and burn up those trees, and my carbon goes poof back out into the air. And what does that mean for me as a buyer?